to episode 84 of School Librarians United. I am your host, Amy Herman. This podcast is dedicated to the issues and challenges school librarians face every day. As a school librarian in my 14th year, I found myself asking the question, where is the podcast that will help me do my job? I wanted a podcast which addressed the nuts and bolts of running a successful library program. I don't claim to have the answers, but I hope that this is a platform to share resources and exchange ideas. Now is a perfect time to mention that all the ideas and opinions expressed in this podcast by myself, by my interview guests, and from the listeners who contact the podcast are our own and do not reflect those of our school districts. When incorporating research, I always make sure to cite my sources. So whether you are a novice or a veteran school librarian, this podcast has something for you. First, I'd like to congratulate Julie, who earned her MLIS from UNC Greensboro while working in Germany. She'll be starting her very first library in Korea. I'd like to extend a very special welcome this week to listeners Heather in Virginia, Karen in Australia, Penny in New Zealand, and Becca in North Carolina. Sarah in North Carolina is finding time listening to episodes while she catalogs books this week in her library. I'm very jealous. And she asked for an episode specifically devoted to the topic of virtual book clubs. Now, I know that virtual book clubs were mentioned in episode 70, Virtual Libraries and Librarians, in my conversation with Angie Miller, as well as episode 77, Virtual Culture of Reading, with Melissa Tom. So, friends, if you would like to share your experiences hosting virtual book clubs and would like to share those resources with listeners, please reach out to the podcast. I welcome you and all listeners to reach out with your feedback, questions, and episode suggestions either on Facebook, Twitter, or the email address schoollibrariansunited@gmail.com. If you include your mailing address, I will be sure to send you a podcast sticker. And friends, if you have to turn in your computer because your school is replacing it and your podcast sticker was on it, Amanda Jones, please let me know because I will send you a replacement sticker. No problem. And now for today's episode, Virtual Makerspace, and my conversation with Amy Rubin. Excited to be sharing a conversation with you today. I'm having with Amy Rubin. Thank you so much for sharing time with the podcast. Before we get started, we discovered in prepping for this episode that you and I have at the very least, three things in common. Amy and I are both librarians, named Amy. Mm-hmm. We share the same birthday.
That was incredible when you messaged me that.
Well, it's not hard because cyber stalking you on Twitter when people are wishing you happy birthday. And I'm like, dude, that's my birthday.
Yeah, that was a great story. My team of first grade teachers had texted me that night of the day we were announced going virtual and said, can you meet us on Teams tomorrow for a meeting? And I was thinking in my mind, oh, man, that's my birthday. They want to have some collaboration meeting and start planning. I'm like, okay, come on, Amy, saddle up. But they were really surprising me, which is sweet. It was wonderful.
I think that's so sweet. So they still celebrated and you guys were able to, I'll tell you, as somebody with a summer birthday, I consider myself ageless. Nobody celebrates my birthday. Right. And I can just perpetually hang out at, 41. And we all know well and good that's not how old I am. But nobody seems to know when I celebrate my birthday, and I like it. So, Amy, thank you so much for joining us. Would you please describe for us your, irrespective of pandemic, what is your current library? Where do you teach? And tell us what is life like normally for you under what we would consider pre-pandemic circumstances?
Sure. I am at an elementary school in Metro Atlanta. We are part of a large, diverse district with over 100 schools in it. The school that I am at is a pre-K through 5, serving about 550 students, give or take. And this is my 15th year at the school, starting my 15th year.
Wow. All right. Well, it's nice. I mean, I listen to listeners for whom this year is their first year in their building. And
I couldn't imagine.
I sit there and go, wow, what a year to start when you haven't built those relationships that you have with your staff members. Tell me, it sounds, when we were talking earlier, you weren't always a school librarian. So did you, what life did you have before you worked in the school of libraries?
So yes, the Amy version 1.
Yeah.
In my career, my undergraduate degree and a graduate degree in journalism, and worked as a newspaper reporter for many, many years. And after my husband and I adopted our son, I dabbled a little in freelance writing, but that was kind of a feast or famine. Mm-hmm. And so just decided to take the time spent with him. But as he was getting ready to start kindergarten, I was really thinking about what do I want to do to re-enter the workforce. Loved librarianship. My dad actually had been a librarian and became a professor of library science, and was really interested in it. So took a part-time job at the public library and started to pursue my MLIS and school library certification. And in just a great convergence of events, was hired at my son's elementary school because the school librarian there retired.
Wow. That's fun. I mean, being able to work where your kid does. You and I were talking about this before we started recording, but ironically, about 2 hours after one of my episodes posted, we found out that our district will be starting virtually until it's safe to return to our schools in person. Tell the listeners, where are you in this pandemic limbo?
Okay, so originally our district earlier in the summer announced that parents would be offered a choice, either remote learning or face-to-face. And then July 16th, the day before our birthday, an announcement was made that we would, because of the current data that was coming out in our state, we would start fully remote. However, staff, teachers are reporting to the buildings to provide their instruction and other services. So we started pre-planning last week, and I guess that was August 3rd. The first day of school for students, however, has been delayed to August 17th. So that's fantastic because it gives us 2 full weeks of pre-planning to really prepare.
Wow. And, that's important because I know in negotiating a contract, the expectations that you place on your teaching staff over the summer, when you shift gears like this, for many people, it's a contractual issue. When principals are calling meetings and you're like, dude, it's August. So I think this is important because for the purposes of our conversation, access to our collections, access to our teaching spaces is really key because for some of us, if we are planning things like we're talking in this case, a makerspace, when we're even just trying to do something like a story time, if we can have access to our collection, it really does change the kinds of things we can do with our students, or it certainly makes them certainly easier if we have access to our workspace. I'm wondering,
absolutely.
It's not related to our topic of Virtual Makerspace, but I noticed that this spring you did Reader's Advisory virtually. And I'm really fascinated by that because Reader's Advisory is something which is so foundational to what we offer to our students. And I think when we became virtual, that has to take on a different spin. And yet for many people, this is where our true value to their children is. Can you tell us how you managed to do Virtual Reader's Advisory this spring? Because I think this is something I could really get on board with.
Yes, it was great. It grew out of a program I already had in place that I had approached my administration about doing a few years ago because I was increasingly getting concerned with students struggling to find the book, and let's say you have a class in there, it's 10 minutes. It's like boom, 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 trying to get the books. And maybe they're just still getting the same thing over and over, which is fine. Read that thing, but let's also try to branch out a little. So I was walking one morning before the Teleschool day started, getting a little exercise, and I was listening to an episode of The Yarn, and they were talking about book access, book choice during the pandemic. And all of a sudden it just hit me. Whoa, Amy, you can take these concept of the reading appointments and do it virtually. So I went in that day, I emailed my principal. She's incredibly supportive. And I started it that day. I made up a Microsoft form, which was really just an adaptation of the one I already had in place for my in-person. And I included a link to that for your show notes, so that people could see the types of questions I asked. Sent it out in our school newsletter, had teachers share it with parents, shared it on social media. Parents would fill it out with their children, and then I would email the parent to schedule a good time to meet on Teams, Microsoft, because we're fully Microsoft. So the student would just log in, and I would call them on Teams, and the parent would, I like the parent to be a part of the appointment too, to have those discussions and also be having those crucial discussions of the student making the book choice. And this,
I really think that the fun thing about this is it's almost like a parent-teacher conference, but for like a really good reason. It sounds like when you are talking, you're getting exposure, not just you're getting to see your student one-on-one, but then the parents there as well. I can't think of a better way to show families the kind of value that we bring to our students. And you're right. When we work with students in a typical situation, you've got a classroom full of kids, the ability to give that sort of one-on-one attention to an individual reader is just not possible. So
yeah, exactly. I mean, there's a time issue. So this gives that one-on-one time and directs them to books. I'm taking their interests. I'm taking even, I ask what hobbies they like or sports, favorite genres. What I did normally when I'm doing them in person, I'm just making a book list out of Destiny that I think matches their needs. And we're going with that. For this, I switched it to our Mac and Via books. And I would ask the parent for permission to go into the student's Mac and Via account and essentially load the books onto their wish lists in their backpack in Mac and Via. So they could just go right into it.
I love it. It's like you're like a concierge.
A book concierge.
You're like a book concierge. And if any of you have listened to Matthew Winter's Kidlit these days, I totally stole that because Matthew Winter uses the phrase a book concierge for what we do with our students. But such a customized and personal service that you're offering to your students. Friends, I am including the Knowledge Quest link to the article that you originally wrote, Amy, for Knowledge Quest about your partnering with parents about this. So I think that's fantastic. And I would love to make this an opportunity, especially for those of us who are starting virtually, that some of that parent hand-holding is really key. And I know that it certainly, because you're having these meetings on your, it's as opposed to like an email, which is still helpful. And I'll be honest, I emailed parents all the time when they would email me questions, and that is fine. But again, you're not having that person, albeit with a screen in between you. But I really like that as an option. And I think that for many of us starting virtually, we will have a certain amount of flexibility with our schedule that we can certainly extend that invitation to our families. Thank you so much for sharing that.
Yes.
So I wanted to just ask you, and you have so many wonderful things that our listeners can learn about, but your Feel Good Fridays, one of the things I did before season 2 ended was I interviewed Martha Bongiorno about social and emotional learning in a virtual space. How are you supporting your students and these Feel Good Fridays virtually?
Yes. Martha's amazing. And a lot of what these ideas that I was thinking about with Feel Good Friday and how I'd like to expand now into the start of this new school year really evolved out of Martha and her good discussion she's having with us about SEL. Really, it just evolved out of not long after remote learning started last spring, hearing concerns, loneliness of the children, and just concerned about the social and emotional impact, and also, frankly, for the adults, for the parents. So I wanted to have something that would be uplifting and acknowledge those feelings. Really just take kind of a Mr. Rogers approach to it. I grew up in Pennsylvania, so I was raised on Mr. Rogers, and there's I think something very solid about his approach of, yes, we're going to acknowledge these feelings, but how are we going to respond to those feelings, and what can we do? So Feel Good Fridays was a way to acknowledge it, but also move forward with it in positive ways. And really what it was I took one chapter book that was geared towards 3 through 5. I did Walking with Miss Millie. Little did I know, though, that then, of course, later in the summer, it would have really strong race relation themes that the students could draw on. And then I would do a new picture book each week that really just had themes, and Walking with Miss Millie certainly did, of empathy, of kindness, of understanding challenges people are going through, of understanding differences between you and somebody else, and how you respond to it. And then I just ended each installment that I would post on Fridays with a Microsoft form embedded at the end with maybe a response or an activity, like what's something kind you can do to your for your family this week. Very simple, but just more to take it of not just listening to the story, but applying it to themselves personally.
Can I ask, did you offer like the picture books to your K2 and then your Walking with Miss Millie to your 3-5s? Were those separate lessons, or did you integrate them together?
It was separate recordings. Okay. So each week, and it was listed as 3 through 5 and K through 2. Now, it was the parent's choice. If the family, say, had a first grader, a third grader, and a fifth grader, hypothetically, and they all wanted to listen to the chapters of Walking Miss Millie together, they could. But I would post a new chapter book a new picture book under one link, and then the new chapter. And I posted it I used Smore to share it out.
So, Amy, I'm really being selfish here and asking a lot of you, but, I'm so curious about the titles of the picture books that you used with your students on Feel Good Friday. Would you mind sharing with listeners the titles that you did on Feel Good Friday? Because I have a sneaking suspicion that listeners would like to incorporate some of that into their Feel Good Fridays.
Absolutely. I included the link to the Smore where the titles of all the books I used are listed.
Thank you so much. I always, listeners, I appreciate the generosity of the guests who come on the show. And I want to make sure that everyone recognizes, when we put together a show, the expectation is that we're going to be able to give listeners something they can use. And I really appreciate my guests when they bring these resources and so willingly share them with our listeners, because I think that we all need help right now.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
We all need help. And if this is one way we can help one another, then I'm so excited to do this every week. Amy, you were very generous in coming to talk with us about your Virtual Makerspace program. And I would like to know a little bit about your Makerspace before the shutdown in the spring. So could you tell us pre-pandemic, What did your virtual space look like? Because it might give us an idea of where you ended up going with it virtually.
Sure. It was amazing. I miss it. It was really vibrant. It grew. We started, I was probably, some people might say, a late bloomer to the Makerspace game, but I really kind of stood back and wanted to see, how am I connecting this? Why am I adding this to the media center? So I started it. Now I'm losing track of time. 4 years ago, I started to roll it out. And my idea behind it, I call it play with a purpose. Some people walk by a makerspace and think it's just about playing, but there's purpose behind it. And our makerspace pre-pandemic was pretty much in use all day long throughout the day. We'd carved out a large corner of the media center where it was primarily housed. And I also converted, we had a closet that when I started there 15 years ago housed all the VHS and DVDs, and we converted that to all our supplies, the robots and things. But, really what it comes down to, it's the collaboration, the communication, and the creativity.
I really like that it sounds like you were able to create a space that incorporated low tech, no tech, and high tech. And
very much so.
Having that as available to your students, I think really does speak to the fact that some of them will more readily find themselves gravitating towards different areas of your makerspace.
Very much so. And I set it up essentially as a giant choice board. We have a large bulletin board at one of the entrances to our library, and usually I have about 8 to 10 stations running. Now the stations aren't out. They take a task card, so to speak, that I keep in envelopes. And there's a certain number of task cards for that particular station. So let's say if you have 6 people on the robots, then that's not an open choice anymore. You'll need to pick a different one. And then they come to our circulation desk where we keep the tubs that have the supplies.
Wonderful. Can I ask you, what inspires your makerspace ideas? Because, makerspaces are so unique to the person who heads them up. And so I'd love to hear, where did you get the ideas for the different activities that you wanted to have in your physical makerspace?
Well, really collaborating with other people like you, talking with other librarians, the social media that we're all on, conferences. Sometimes, because I do some of my work, especially when it's curriculum based, I do some making activities directly connected into projects with the teachers, are rooted out of a book or a unit of study, something like that. Lots of times, it's funny, my mind transformed just looking at ordinary objects and saying, oh, we could do something with this. And a shout out to my 8-year-old nephew, because a lot of the ideas actually come from him. He does a lot of making. We Zoom regularly, and we'll talk about different things, and he'll give me ideas, which is great.
Oh yeah, no, my son, one of my sons is a 3D printer enthusiast, and when my son Sam is I've run ideas by him before about what can you print with a 3D printer, and it really does help when you can talk to somebody before you make those investments in your program.
Absolutely.
What would you say, and because people will want to know, what in your physical space, what would you say are your most popular activities that your students ask for again and again?
Well, so, it's interesting because sometimes it's the simplest thing that the students love the most. And so the straws and connectors, like the Strawbies, but also just the straws and connectors. I forget the company that makes them. I got a bunch of those when we opened them up. And then I was finding more and more and more students were liking them across the grades. And they wouldn't want to take their things down at the end. And so then I said, well, hey, let's just tape off this whole area and let's have a giant ongoing school-wide build. So pre-pandemic, we had a big area taped off, and kids really 1st through 5th would just come in and keep adding and building. And that's where I also see like these SEL skills coming out, the communication, the working together. Was just amazing. And also, and I don't know if I'm going to say it the correct way, the Kiva or Kava planks, they cannot get enough of those. I wish I had thought of creating.
Yes, somewhere on a tropical island, the Kiva plank inventor is sitting there with enjoying this genius idea. And, you know, I would not be surprised if some of these trickled into people's purchases at home, things that kids would then say, Mom, what did you do at school? Oh, I built with, and the parents ask about Makerspace. And all of a sudden you end up finding families making these investments at home because, it doesn't involve a screen. It doesn't involve batteries. Kiva planks and straws and strawberries that, wonderful. I love what you said about your 5th grade, one of the activities they like, which is really surprising.
Yeah, the coloring. So when I started the Makerspace a few years ago, one of the things I decided to add were just patterned bookmarkers. Really think of like the adult coloring books where you color. And I would say 75% of the time, 5th graders coming in, they are selecting coloring. They like to sit. I think it's calming. The academics more intense as it needs to be in preparation for middle school. They just like to sit and color for 15 minutes.
Well, and would you also think that similar to like your knitting, it's something you can do while you're having a conversation. So when students gather with the coloring pencils and those really cute bookmarks that come with the patterns, and it's very calming. But it also doesn't require you to the kinds of focus that would mean you couldn't have a conversation with your classmates.
Exactly.
And for our 5th graders, they only have art once every 4 to 6 days. So for students who are particularly artistically inclined, like my son, Ben, who's going into art school, the idea of being in 5th grade and not having as much of an opportunity to express themselves artistically, I'm sure they would welcome that. So I like that because it's a very inexpensive. Actually, can we just tie this together with being virtual? Could you see sending some of these coloring pages in a PDF to your families?
Yes. And actually I did that when we were approaching spring break. I was just seeing a lot of chatter on Facebook, people stressed out, our spring break's not going to be the same. So I created a Smore called Virtual Vacation, and I did link it on the Google Doc. And I gave each day a theme. And so one of the days, I have to go back and look at it, but I think it was maybe called Soothing Saturday or Soothing Sunday, something like that. And I found some great just coloring pages that I linked on there and they could use. So I did include that link because some of the activities on there are maker oriented.
Well, and I think that also we don't want to place so much expectation on the families that they have to have a printer and they're going to be printing off these pages. But on the other hand, if you recognize that it is a no-tech sort of solution to keeping kids focused, but also calming them during this time, I really think that's fantastic. I understand you used coding and robots in your makerspace. How have you been able to reimagine that aspect of your makerspace into a virtual one?
Yes, we were using them pretty heavily, primarily Dash and Dot and Cubetos. and using them as a free choice in the Makerspace, but I also was incorporating them into lessons with our teachers, standards-based units that we would work on together. So transitioning it, I did a little bit of some of the websites out there where they could go on and use. Most of my kids in 1st through 5th were pretty familiar with Dash and liked our Dash robot. So one day I found storyboards that Wonder Workshop had come out with. So I used those as a maker activity for them virtually to map out the story and the potential code you think you want to use when we're back, doing that sort of thing.
Mm-hmm. Wonderful. I know that coding is something that we can all sort of incorporate, and that is, obviously they don't have the robots to then have these all work in. But my understanding is that in some of these coding programs, you can save those codes, and then in theory, when you return to the school, you could then use them on the robots that you have in your makerspace.
Exactly. And actually that idea grew out of doing the storyboarding from my nephew. We were just having one of our Aunt Amy and Rory visits online, and he said, let's write a story. And he actually has a Dash and Dot robot at home. And he said, let's write a story for Dash and Dot. And then it evolved from there and mapped it out. And I thought, oh, wait, we could do something like this virtually, that I could have my students do it. Yeah, and then you could do that coding. And of course, they could practice. They can go on Scratch. They can go on some of these things and start getting ideas for how they would code it, what they could make it do.
Oh, that's great. I love that idea. Listeners, I've included a link to Amy's Smore newsletter with some of her virtual makerspace lessons. And Amy, you always begin with a story that you read to your students. Can you explain for listeners how you make those read-alouds available to your students?
Yes, our whole district is Microsoft. So what I did was record myself on Teams, as if I were having a meeting, but really I just picked a cozy spot in my house with some bookcases behind it and a comfy chair. And that's where I recorded every time, because I wanted them to have that familiarity. If there's Mrs. Rubin. Mm-hmm. And then I saved the recording, and it goes into our Microsoft Stream account, and I could just link that to the Smore so they could get to it.
Well, and I think that, the issue has been raised on many Facebook library forums that, we have to be very cautious about copyright and mm-hmm. respecting the author's, ownership of these materials. But if we keep it on, my understanding of this, and I am not a lawyer, I'm just married to one, is that as long as these read-alouds that are recorded are done so in a closed audience, you're not putting this out on YouTube. You're keeping it on closed, and ideally, when this is all said and done, you are removing those and discarding those read-alouds.
Right. That's why I felt that forum worked well for me. So to our listeners here, when you click on those links, you will not have access to them, because when our students would go on to them, they would then have to log into their class link account, a single sign-on, and then the story would come up. And my intention is to take it down when this is all done. I had not taken it down yet because we are continuing on the remote, and I want to keep Feel Good Fridays, for example, expand it, keep Teleschool Makerspace, expand it.
I think that's smart. And I want to say, and I'm going to say right now, I'm brand new to Schoology. We are implementing Schoology for the first time in our elementary levels. And my understanding is that we can do something similar. And also with another, there's a Canvas. which is another LMS, which
oh yes,
my understanding is you can post your recordings on a Canvas learning management system and on Schoology. So that would help you sort of make sure that you maintain those copyright permissions. And I want to ask you a little bit about these activities, because I think that we need to, when we talk about makerspace in the home, be cognizant that the students are going to be using materials in their homes for their makerspace.
Yes. Absolutely. And I was very intentional about that because I knew parents were stressed with all of a sudden their kids are there. They're trying to roll out the remote learning that the parents were giving to them. And the last thing I wanted was for their kid to be coming to them saying, we have to go get this, this, or this. So it was all stuff that I felt fairly certain most kids would have in the house. Empty cereal boxes was the basis for one activity, paper, toilet paper tubes, if you got toilet paper, a deck of cards.
What about like cardboard boxes?
Cardboard boxes, yeah.
We're sort of shamelessly surviving on Amazon Prime.
Oh, right.
And especially as we start to get our two sons ready to go to college, a few things have been arriving via Amazon Prime, and it's an obscene amount of boxes, which accumulate. But I know that our makerspace, when it was getting just started, we were asking for donations of cardboard because that's not something that people normally just keep around.
Right. Well, we had done the same thing. It was I pretty much always had an ongoing call with our staff and our PTA, bring me your toilet paper tubes, your paper towel tubes, cardboard, we'll take it.
No, that's
so.
I think that's a great way to upcycle some of the things that are accumulating in our homes. I like that your lessons, they start off with a story. There is a component where they do a makerspace. And then the last step of your virtual makerspace is to have the students share out. Can you tell us how you do that with your students in your virtual makerspace?
Sure. Again, that grew out of our physical makerspace because sharing, I quickly saw, was such an important part of the making experience for our students. And they wanted people to see what they were doing. So I would create Padlets for some of the things. When we were in school, they could grab an iPad, scan the QR code to post a picture of whatever they made. If it was creation on the Lego wall, if it was something with the straws and connectors, whatever. So that was natural to then have that component with the virtual makerspace, because this was a way, even though not physically in person, for them to still feel that connection in some way with their classmates. If they went on and saw, oh, my friend posted this, and they could even, put a heart on it. I did not enable the comments on the Padlet. Just wanted to take some baby steps with that, but they could, click the heart to show they liked it. I didn't get as much posting as I hoped I would have last spring. I attribute that, I really think, to just the general sense families were feeling of being overwhelmed in so many ways, which was understanding. And so my hope is to be able to have a little more sharing as we move into the start of this school year.
I noticed that the lessons that you're sharing are asynchronous. They involve you recording and then posting, and then your students can enjoy your lessons when it fits with their schedule, when it fits, more importantly, with their parents' schedule.
Right.
And yet your lessons still have this opportunity to build relationships and feel connected to your library program, to you, and to their classmates.
Yes, just even little things, like I always recorded myself in the same spot, so it became this familiar little corner in my home, and that they could see my face. I wanted them to see my face and hear my voice, and not just have me sending out an email or a posting of, here's an activity to try. And not that I'm discounting that's has good value too. But I anytime I can make that connection with them personally. And it is my hope as we start the school year remotely this year to be able to try to do some live things, because I will be teaching live lessons as we roll out this year. So as we get into the school year, my hope is to be able to do read aloud and have a live activity we could do together.
Wonderful. I was able to do some of those. We called them drop-ins. We would, when the class was scheduled to meet, I got the first 10 minutes. And, just having that face-to-face. And again, they're hearing your voice and you're reading stories. And, there's something oddly just familiar about that, because you're like, this feels better than not at all.
Right.
I wanted to ask you, physical makerspaces can vary widely in building materials and tools and robotics and supplies, and they always require a financial commitment, either from within your own budget, sometimes with your PTO, or your school allocates for your makerspace when it's a physical space that requires materials that have to be replenished. Is that true of your virtual makerspace? Do you have any sort of financial investment in the things you're doing for the virtual programming that you're pushing out?
So really with the virtual programming, it's what I've done so far really just comes down to the books that I have in my collection already. Okay. And so it was not an added expense for us to incorporate this virtual component. And moving forward with my hope of doing some of the live activities at some point, that would just be drawing on supplies I already had in the media center, which did have the startup cost originally of getting them into the media center. But we were of tremendous administration support, and not just from a budgetary standpoint that helped get our physical makerspace set up, but from the support and understanding of the purpose of the makerspace and why it's important to have. And, my principal and assistant principal will regularly even just come through to visit the makerspace and see what the kids are doing. And our PTA was very supportive. There was a lot of PTA money that went into starting that. But to circle back to your original question, is evolving it onto online, there wasn't an added expense because it was just drawing from what was already there.
Well, and I think I'm sort of talking just sort of through this, but my memory of, late March, early April was all of these corporations opening up their resources for the hashtag distance learning that was happening. And so you got to see firsthand, we had, World Book, and we had Capstone, and we had all of these databases that were opening up their options and saying, hey, this is free until June 31st. This is free until June 31st. And you're like, that's great. What are we going to do for free now?
Right.
And
right.
I really am waiting. I think we're all crossing our fingers and hoping that somebody's going to magically throw their resources at us for free. My understanding is Epic has done that, and I know some programs like Code.org don't have registration fees or subscription fees. It's less likely, in my opinion, that these same companies are going to offer things for free when they already did that this past spring.
Right. And I get that. And I think, was it a couple episodes ago, you had a more in-depth discussion about that, and that we can't count on those companies. And I had a really good discussion with our CST, our curriculum support teacher, a week or so ago about, okay, what, just narrowing down even to ebooks. What is our focus going to be? And so one, to not overwhelm our parents with too many resources, but two, because we don't know what's going to be free, how long is it going to be free. So for us, we're using, our district uses Mac and Via for our ebook platform at the elementary level. I mean, they use it through elementary, middle, and high school, but our overdrive for our district is just at, Sora is just at the middle school and high school. Mackin has come to us and said that they are continuing the free access to a few thousand books that they pushed out through the first semester. So I was very happy about that. And I had a pretty robust ebook collection to begin with, but that makes it much richer to have that access, and to going back to that, to really being able to provide book access and book choice.
Well, and I'd like to, just because I have you on the spot, and and the expectation is we are, and my heart goes out to our fellow school librarians who are teaching in person right now, because I know it is a time where many of us are teaching with trepidation and are legitimately fearful for the safety of our students and ourselves. When it comes to your makerspace, looking ahead, have you envisioned what kind of reentry to your makerspace you'll have while we're currently in our pandemic? And if you return in physically to your makerspace, do you see any sort of change in protocol or how your makerspace is utilized by your students while we're still in very much a pandemic situation?
Yeah. I mean, I've thought about it a lot. It makes me sad in many ways because that was such a vibrant part of the media center. But I am being realistic, and I know that because you're handling all these different things, and there's not any way that I can see right now that something like the school-wide build of straws and connectors could viably be open and be safe. So I have really only started to dip my toes in the water in terms of thinking of what it could look like coming back in. It certainly will not look anything like it does now.
No.
I think that perhaps it could be something in the classrooms, much further down the road, to where I say, here are some Kiva planks that you can have for the day. But again, is that just one student, or this is your pile of Kiva planks and that's your pile of Kiva planks and that's it. But it's going to come down to, ideas, and then at the end of the day, having careful, thoughtful discussions, meetings with my administration on what we think are safe, viable options.
Well, and I have to agree, because I know some of us are not circulating books for the foreseeable future. And I think when we're in a situation where we're not even circulating books, it's very hard to justify moving our makerspace out and available to our students when we can't, in all fairness, give any sort of guarantee that these things are safe to be using. I have heard something, and I want to follow up on it later, but a make and take sort of situation where things, things can... along the lines of your coloring, your bookmarks. These are things that can be given to the students, and they can do them at home, and they can be done in their classrooms, and you don't have to worry about sanitizing your makerspace supplies. So.
Right. So using more of the consumable items, of which I have a lot. And this is why I love your podcast, because I walk away with ideas. But I could see that even if it's making them up in little baggies, which is something actually I did previously, pre-pandemic, when I would do novel engineering, where you're taking book and they're designing a solution to the problem in it. So as one example, I did Ezra Jack Keats Peter's chair with kindergarten, and they needed to design a new chair that would work for Peter. So all of their supplies they used in that were consumables. It was popsicle sticks, paper, toilet paper tubes. So something like that could definitely work to still have that making component going on.
I think moving forward, as more and more schools are meeting their students in their buildings, I would love to do an episode on how our makerspaces have to evolve to makerspaces in a pandemic, because I know it's such an important part of your program. Friends, we are so fortunate to have Amy Rubin join us today, and I know that you've given all of us so much to think about when it comes to our virtual programs and just how important they are to our students. So would you share for us where we can follow you on social media? Because I know we want to see how this happens moving forward. What exciting things you end up doing with your students this fall?
Sure. I'm on Twitter at Librarian Rubin. And I'm on Instagram, librarian_Rubin, Rubin. And I also run the Instagram for our school librarians in our district, which is FCS_lit.
Excellent. And friends, again, this is one of those episodes you are definitely want to make sure that you take a look at the show notes, because Amy has given us so many things we can work with. And if you're mulling around what kinds of things you can do with your students virtually, I think that Amy has given us so many great ideas to go with. Thank you so much for joining us today. I'm really excited we were able to have this conversation.
Well, thank you so much for having me on, and I love the opportunity to get to share what I'm doing, and also learn about you and your program and get more ideas.
Thanks again, Amy. Take care.
Okay, take care.
I am so glad that Amy was able to share both her expertise and her resources with us on Virtual Makerspace. Please be sure to check out the show notes for resources that you can download today. If you found this episode helpful, please share it out with your team, your PLN, and on social media. The topic of our next episode will be Library of Congress, Resources for All, and my interview with Tom Bober. I hope you will tune in.